and we being Patrick Watson, the lovely and talented, and myself, the mere humble Nick Dagan Best. How you doing, Watson?
I'm good. It's been an interesting week for me.
Mm-hmm.
I was asked a couple of weeks ago about if I would like to have a role with the organization Cap ISAR,
Mm-hmm.
which is essentially the certification branch of the International Society for Astrological Research, ISAR, and I thought it might be like for a being a board member or something, because I'd previously been nominated to be a board member of the main organization of ISAR late last year, and turns out that they actually were considering me as president to fill out the remainder of the former president's term. So I got the news this week that I was actually voted to be the Cap ISAR president by the board. So I'm now the president of Cap ISAR, and this is very interesting to me because although I've been active in astrology for a long time, um, I only actually formally got certified as an astrologer with ISAR just a few months ago. So this feels a little strange. I mean, I was actually nominated to be on the ISAR board even before I was officially certified by the organization. So I feel like I've leapt a few. It feels very recent, even though I have been involved with the organization for a while. I gave a lecture at a past ISAR conference, so I've had some past involvement with the organization. But yeah, so I'm now the president of the certification branch, and so I've been giving a lot of thought of what I can bring and what how I'll be able to be kind of service to that branch of the astrology world. So I've been thinking about that. This is as Jupiter, is opposing my 10th house ruler while transiting through my 10th that I found this out. So it makes sense.
Not too
Obviously,
shabby.
there's a few other astrological things I could point out about it, but I've already gone on too long with my response to your very simple question. How am
Hardly,
I doing? So,
hardly,
how am I
hardly.
doing? Well, I'm president of Cap
Congratulations.
ISAR. That's a fairly big thing that's happened
We're,
this week. So, how are you, Nick?
we're pretty good, Mr. President.
Okay, Marilyn, calm down.
Happy birthday. It is coming up in a month, so yeah, I'll get my wig ready. Um, in the silver
Yeah.
lame dress.
Yeah.
Well done. It's an important function, and I know you're going to bring something to it because you're always dynamic. You have a lot of thoughts on how things can be done better. So more power to you, and congratulations. Better you than me, as far as I'm concerned. But no, seriously, in all seriousness, well done. Yeah, and aside from that, we're sort of getting back into the swing of things post Mercury retrograde, post Venus retrograde, all that stuff. Things are mostly moving forward, apart from Jupiter having gone retrograde in the past month. Everything else will be sort of going straight. And in November, we have a Sun-Mars conjunction in Scorpio, which I think anyone with planets in Scorpio should be somewhat excited about. It doesn't happen too often, but it typically is a favorable transit for the sign.
Yeah, there's I guess there's a lot we could say about that. It's also going to be opposite Uranus, which makes me a little nervous. So it's kind of an explosive Mars. I remember, one of the last times Mars went through Scorpio, one of the more memorable times that Mars went through Scorpio, while opposite Uranus. I think they covered this in the astrology podcast a while ago. It was a couple of years ago in 2021 when there was this swarm of scorpions that descended upon Egypt, and that happened during Mars and Scorpio making this opposition to Uranus. So if we think of
That sounds
Scorpio is kind of the sign of the creepy crawlies, then
that sounds very, very biblical.
yeah, it does. And for us, that would be happening in our fourth house. So I guess I'm thinking of the possibilities of that, and hoping that it doesn't mean like there's going to be like an insect invasion, something in my in our
Sure. Yeah.
respective abodes.
Oh,
Or
yeah. No,
kind of
I'm not so worried about that. Yeah, I think we're both trying to improve our home life somewhat. So my situation is temporary, for the time being. So I'm hoping to stabilize that around then. Yeah, aside from that, we had a very interesting live stream last week when we talked about the revelations of Elon Musk's birth time. And that brought up an interesting comment from Twitter, something that I really sort of kicked myself for not thinking of myself, because I often do cast relocated charts for people like Elon Musk, who spend a good chunk of their life living far away from their actual place of birth. And he hasn't lived in South Africa for quite some time. I forget, you probably know better than I do, but I know it's been a long time.
Yeah, I think he's lived outside of South Africa since he was a teen, I believe.
Right.
He moved to Canada first, and then eventually moved to the US.
Right. So in instances like this, I very often do cast a relocated chart. I've found it work. I'm someone who's lived all around, and there was no I was already quite convinced about relocating astrology, relocated charts in astrology, and then I moved to South Africa, where I really get the best version of my chart I can get on planet Earth, really. And it was just, it worked better than I could have imagined. It really is something that works. Oh, the limitation being, of course, that most of the planet is covered in water, and so it very well may be that a given individual's best place on planet Earth is somewhere in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, where there's no, that can happen, and that is the downfall. But the really interesting revelation. This is, I want to give credit where credit's due. This is a young astrologer who I've seen come up. I think their name is GPT. Is that right? Something, or GBT? I think it's GBT. My apologies if I'm getting your acronym wrong.
Well, he does have a proper name. I didn't know if he wants to necessarily be named, but I know
you know who the person is. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I get lost in people's, Twitter handles, and if I actually know them,
right. Yeah.
There's a disconnect. I'm like,
I'm
kind
of dreading the next time I'm ever at a conference, because I'm going to be like, oh yeah, you're that person with that avatar, but I don't quite actually know who you are exactly.
Sure.
Anyway,
this person brought up a very interesting fact that if you relocate Elon Musk's chart from South Africa to California, then you get a chart not unlike, quite similar, if not identical, to the one that you rectified. So I think it's a really interesting, quote unquote, fail on your part to nail it down. Because that relocated chart does, we all said, gee, Patrick, it's a really good job. It makes sense. It's too bad you were wrong. But, no one said like, oh, gee, what a like crummy rectification. How could you possibly have thought this was the chart? But then sure enough, the relocated chart winds up being very similar to the one that you had rectified. So you were wrong, but you did show a sort of, an adherence to like a consistency and an adherence to a model that I think served you better than maybe you're willing to give yourself credit for. Now, you're not such a big fan of relocated charts. That's the irony here.
Yeah. So I mean, I don't necessarily feel like I should take credit for that. I feel like
Okay.
something that is kind of interesting though is when I did my original, I don't know if I actually wrote this I'm looking through what I had actually written, but yeah, basically my objection to relocating charts is more conceptual. it's more fundamental. If basically, if it's as above, so below, then your birth happened where it
Yeah,
happened.
sure.
And, there are so many, there are also many like location specific dimensions to astrological prognostication that are based on where you're born, such as looking at the ascensional times, which is dependent on your latitude, and of course the angles, the most sort of prime part of your chart that the most some of the most individuating or individualizing factors for your natal chart are based on that precise location. And so I think that one needn't necessarily completely rearrange the chart to still be able to tell that there may be certain qualities associated with certain places if you were to just say look at the astrocartographical features of a given place. Because the other concern I have is then that if you relocate the chart, that would change all of the house rulerships, and theoretically that would just change your destiny. And I guess it depends on how deterministic you are in your view of astrology, if you really think that relocating your chart will change your fate. And then of course I also wonder what happens what happens to if we're supposed to relocate our natal charts, if we move outside of our birthplace, what happens if we were to take a trip to the moon? What happens if we were to go through interstellar space? What happens then to this conception of fate as as sort of summed up by your natal chart? So I think it to me the objection is more fundamental. And I also would think that how would it be possible then that you could still make sense of the original natal chart placements if they can change just depending on where you are? To me, what seems like the more reasonable sort of accommodation is that because when you're looking at your astrocartographical lines, you're looking at where the planets were in relation to the horizon at a given point on Earth at the exact time you were born. So even that is somewhat still contingent on where exactly you were on Earth when you were born. And I think it's reasonable to say that, at least from the astrological perspective, it's reasonable to say then that perhaps those different places have some of the qualities of the planets which were rising or setting or culminating or anti-culminating at that time. I'm much more hesitant to say that supersedes the primary or initial conditions. To me, basically, the natal is king, and so it's difficult for me to conceptualize the hierarchical or the relative importance of a relocated chart relative to the natal. And so I don't know if I'm making sense here, but basically my objection is not that you might not be able to make some kind of sense out of your relocated chart. I'm not arguing this on a chart by chart basis or, oh, look at this makes sense. I'm just arguing on a much more fundamental and conceptual basis that I don't quite it's hard. That's why it's hard for me to give a really full-throated kind of defense or support for relocating charts.
Yeah, no, it's the center of the argument. Like, I mean, I absolutely think the nativity is the core, the center, the basic thing around which everything else revolves. So I don't think that a relocated chart just totally supplants the nativity, not by any stretch. But when you're talking about the question of whether or not you're changing your fate by moving, what I would counter, I would say, well, you're changing it as much as it is possible to change one's fate, to change your location.
Unless your fate to change your location.
Well, yeah, no, sure. Like, philosophically, yes, but I just mean like pragmatically, like there's the single easiest way to sort of change your fate is to go to a different part of the world. Because that it's automatically going to be something different, even if you escape Florida so you wouldn't get eaten by a gator, and then you went to Australia and then a crocodile ate you, but still, okay, maybe that was your fate, but going to a different place changes your life, and it does enable, very often enables you to become a different person, in
What's that
some
Mark
sense,
Twain quote? There's that like famous Mark Twain quote about traveling. Um, when you, I'd have to look it up. Maybe someone knows what I'm talking about. There's like a famous Mark Twain quote about how when you travel somewhere and you come back, then you've changed.
yes, yeah.
And everything has changed when you've come back, and suddenly, or it might be a quote about how like the single greatest cure for prejudice is to
Yeah, no,
travel.
that's a good one.
Maybe is something
Yeah,
along those lines.
yeah.
Someone I'm
I
sure in
mean,
the comments will correct me.
yeah. So someone in comments is like, if you change your fate, if you move and therefore change your fate, what happens if you move back? Look, I'm just making the basic argument that, like, if you're stuck, if you're stuck in a city and the circumstances are unfavorable, and there's not much you can do about changing those circumstances. If you do go to a different, city or a different part of the world, and you encounter different circumstances that are maybe easier or maybe harder than where you were, but either way, like, it was, in many cases, your one path of actually doing something about your situation. um that's all I mean. So
Right,
I don't want to get
right.
into some deep, like, theoretical
Well,
rabbit
see,
hole. It's
well,
not.
to me, that's the whole, that's the whole point of my objection, though, is
Oh, no, no,
the
sure,
that
sure.
theoretical underpinning. What, like, um, well, oh, I think someone found the quote.
Travel is fatal to prejudice, bigotry, and narrow-mindedness, and many of our people need it sorely on these accounts.
Broad, wholesome, charitable use of men and things cannot be acquired by vegetating in one little corner of the earth all one's lifetime.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
But,
think
I mean,
there was another one though
the,
about how you've changed when you come back from someplace. But
it's the funny thing about Twain. Like, he had to travel. He had to travel to make money. And so he wound up, like, his travels are like that. It's an incredible story, like having dinner with Kaiser Wilhelm and all these, like, wild adventures around the world. But the whole thing was, he needed money for his family, and so that was the only reason he did. He really didn't want to do this speaking tour. He had to travel around the world. And the funniest part about this, the reason he ran out of money was he invested, like, all his money for someone he knew, a friend of his, I think, who was building this, like, elaborate modern printing press that just never got off the ground. Meanwhile, this is just so terrible. Alexander Graham Bell had given Mark Twain one of the few telephones. Twain had one of two telephones in all of Connecticut or wherever he lived. There was, like, his in the mayor's house. And yet he had this thing sitting in his house. He's like, it'll never catch on. He didn't invest any, he's investing all in this printing press.
oh no,
Meanwhile, he had this item in his house, this rare item that should have told him, hey, Mark, maybe you want to get behind this. Or Sam.
this is like someone having a Commodore and thinking this computer thing's never going to take off.
Yeah, no, really.
It's
That's
yeah.
and so it's kind of a funny story for that, but it has this huge impact. He was a Sagittarius sun, and this is the period when Uranus goes into Sagittarius, when he's traveling the world. And it's that same time, like, Theodore Roosevelt is president, and America's becoming sort of imperialistic. And, there's the war against Spain and taking over Cuba and the Philippines. And
that was like the Uranus Neptune opposition across Gemini and Sag in that time.
Yeah, coming out of that
moved into Cancer Capricorn.
Yeah. So he is this sort of international American ambassador who's sort of decrying the rise of imperialism and becoming a really important voice. So it's
Gilded Age John Stewart kind of.
Yeah. Actually, that's really on the money. That's exactly what he is, insofar as you could have one in that day and age.
Right. Yeah, that's kind of how I always thought of Mark Twain.
Sure. Well, he did kind of invent stand-up comedy.
What?
In 1866, he needed money. He got up in a theater in San Francisco and just, like, riffed and made people laugh and got paid for it. And
they literally have an award, like the top award a comedian can get is the Mark Twain Prize, which Jon Stewart won.
Yes, and that's for Mark Twain's literature, that prize, which his writing is funny. But he did actually, I mean, this is what he was doing when he was traveling the world. He was doing these speaking things, but this had built up from this thing he built for himself in San Francisco when the Civil War ended. And, you know, he was just a young man who needed to find a way to support himself. So yeah, he was apparently very good at it. He spoke in Montreal twice.
So really, his quote should be amended a little bit. You know, travel is fatal to prejudice, bigotry, narrow-mindedness. Also, I needed some money. I also good for cash.
Well, I didn't want to cheapen. I think
no,
you know,
no,
really
it's a great, no, it's a
his
wonderful sentiment, and it's absolutely true. But yeah, no, that's very interesting. And of course, I think the most interesting astrological story about Mark Twain, of course, is and you know what I'm going to talk about is the comet story.
The comet, yes.
So how do we make sense of that? Like, I've often thought that was a really just very eerie story, and if you want to maybe summarize it for us, Nick.
Right. Well, he was Halley's Comet comes about every 75 years, and he was born in 1835, the year that Halley's Comet had flown over. And so he always remarked that you know, since he was born when Halley's Comet was flying overhead, he would die when it did. And indeed, when he died in 1910, that was the next time, 75 years later, or 74 and a half, if you will, that Halley's Comet flew by Earth. So, you know, he long before the case. I mean, I can't remember. I could try to track down the quote, but he said it like decades, I think, before it actually happened.
So so I'm confused. Was he actually born like in the time that it was visible, or just like in the general time? Okay, so he was actually like born.
I believe he was born under the comet. Yes.
And then when he died, was that in the approximate time frame, or was it in the exact time frame?
It's close enough to be eerie. It's close enough to be eerie.
Close enough to still be pretty weird.
Yeah, like here in my chart database here, I'll even share the screen. I'm looking at my Mark Twain file.
By the way, for everyone listening, we had like literally no idea what we were going to talk about today. So now we're talking about Mark Twain.
Yeah. So here it says, this is my chart file for him, for his death. On the night Samuel Langhorne Clemens was born, the 30th of November, 1835, Halley's Comet was blazing spectacularly across the autumn sky. And although he was born 2 months prematurely, a frail little runt, and his mother said I could see no promise in him, she nonetheless expressed the hope that Halley's Comet was a bright omen for the baby boy. Her wish came true in a sensational way. So then in 1909, at age 74, and a year before his death, knowing full well that Halley's returned to light up the night roughly every 76 years, he said, I came in with Halley's Comet in 1835 and expect to go out with it. It will be the greatest disappointment of my life if I don't go out with Halley's Comet. The Almighty had said, no doubt here are these two unaccountable freaks. They come in together. They must go out together. And sure enough, just like clockwork, when the 75-year-old Clemens died at 6:22 in the evening of April 21st, 2010, there was Halley's just barely visible on the horizon, but clearly out there to see.
Wow, I wonder where Halley's Comet actually was on the day he was born, like where in the sky, or what longitudinal relationship would have to the Zodiac.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I could use Starry Night to try and figure it out.
Yeah.
Be a bit of a search, but we could, you know, I don't know. Do we want to take our audience?
It might be, yeah, I don't know. We don't want to take everyone through that, but I think that, so he died the day following the comet's subsequent perihelion. So it was actually very close.
Very close. Yeah, that's what it says in this little note, that you could just see it in the horizon.
So I wonder then if there's like what lore exists on comets in the astrological tradition. I mean, the Babylonians took everything into account, even the weather.
Yeah. No. I mean, they were absolutely seen to be omens, but we're just, you know, we're not used to looking at them and interpreting them in that way.
Right. Yeah. Actually, that's kind of interesting. You know, I thought the idea of the Babylonians of like looking at the weather on the day you were born as kind of an omen for, you know, life was really interesting. So I've actually looked back, because I was born in the UK, the Met Office, the meteorological office of the UK, they have extensive records going back, and so I was able to get kind of a pretty granular rundown of the weather, like at the time that I was born. And it was so funny because the description of the weather on the night I was born was that there was patchy fog, because I was actually born in the aftermath of a giant hurricane. I wasn't born during the hurricane of the Mercury retrograde that I was born in. There was like an uncharacteristically strong hurricane, and with the concentration of water planets in my chart, it was like one of the wettest Octobers on record. But on the exact night,
and let's face it, for England, that's saying something.
Yeah, right, yeah. And so on the night I was born, it described that it was dry with patchy fog, which is so funny to me when I read that, because that's actually my mother's nickname for me. is
Patchy fog.
Patchy fog, yeah. Because, well, my name's Patrick, obviously, and she, coming from Arizona, thought that was kind of a hilarious common weather forecast to hear in England. She obviously never heard it in Arizona.
No, they don't get a lot of patchy
they don't get
fog
patchy
in Arizona.
fog, so she just thought that was kind of clever. So that actually like was the basis of like a few email addresses I had, and so I just thought that was really weird to see that phrase pop up very unexpectedly when I was trying to see if there was any kind of omen I might have been able to get from the weather at the time I was born. That might take some research, though, for people to find. It's not easy to find. I know there's a site called Weather Underground, not related to the Weather Underground of
the
70s.
activists.
Yeah,
they're not blowing up the Capitol. Okay, that's good.
William Ayers. Not related to that, but there's a site called Weather Underground, and I think you can find out weather information that's pretty granular there, at least if you're born in the US. I don't know what it would.
There's some pretty good apps out there that go pretty deep.
I
know in South Africa, because we have so many surfers, you have all these apps that like have like really intricate studies of the wind and everything,
Oh yeah.
So yeah. What's the topic today? The topic is relocated charts, Mark Twain, and whatever sort of comes up. We can even talk. I've got a chart file in the Weather Underground. I even emailed one member of the Weather Underground for their birth time, and they responded.
Oh wow, really?
Yeah, it's in Astro Data Bank. We can talk about any old thing. We can talk about Mark Twain and how he objected to imperialism when Uranus was conjunct his sun. I don't know. What do you think?
Maybe we can respond to some of the questions here.
Sure.
Rebecca Johnson has commented this a couple of times. She says, I'm not sure what you guys have planned for today, but could you briefly go over some 7th house placements and what they could mean, like 7th in the 3rd or in the 4th, etc.?
Yeah, I mean that's kind of abstract and and cookie cutter. I mean, these things always mean a thing, but the context is always in the nativity, and I mean, how many examples would you want?
Well, in general, the way I conceptualize it is the ruler of the 7th house actually represents the person who. It represents the character of the person that you might be drawn to as a partner, and the house position can show a particular area of your life that they affect, and sometimes the area of life that they're from. So it can sometimes indicate the manner in which you may come into partnerships or your characteristic experiences with that person. So, for example, without going into too much depth, at least like with my own chart, the ruler of my 7th is Saturn in the 5th house of creative pursuits, of young people, children, and so I met my wife through a choir that I was the pianist for. I was the accompanist for this like pop choir or something. And she also had a child from her previous marriage. And so that was part of, that was kind of, so all of those sort of 5th house topics, like we met as part of like this, being part of this, creative arts ensemble thing. And so those fifth house topics were extremely important for the setting kind of the location of how this topic would arrive in my life. And for Nick, we've mentioned a few times how you've had these like long periods of being, uh, continents apart
Oh
from
yeah, yeah,
from your wife, and your ruler of your seventh is Saturn and the ninth.
yeah.
So it
Well,
seems
and
like
also that I married a woman abroad. My wedding was in South Africa, and
right,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I mean, yeah, yeah.
So it describes some of those characteristic experiences and ongoing sort of features of this topic of relationships. And so that's, I mean, granted, that's just like using our own charts as examples, but that's how I look at it, is in that way. So um there are a lot of astrology books that sort of cover this kind of
Yeah.
material. You can get some pretty interesting delineation material from the Hellenistic texts, especially like I think Firmicus, Montanus, Pretorius. They have some interpretations of like rulers of houses in different places.
Yeah, but as you outline the principle, that's
Yeah.
basically the idea is you're looking for the ruler and what house that's in. Yeah, David in Ecuador says he's always wondered the changes, in the natal charts, and he says he assumes most of our consultations are on the global north. Yes, but I did live in the global south for 6 years, did a lot of consultations for people born, around Southern Africa, not just people born in South Africa, but I read charts for people born in Zambia, Zimbabwe, Mozambique, a lot of different African countries, particularly in the Southern Hemisphere. And yeah, there are some there are some really interesting things that come up around that, and there's some really good astrologers down there as well that don't have as much of a profile. But I'm very much interested in the sort of. I was very conscious before moving to South Africa that my perspective was really tied to the global north. So it was a real opportunity, apart from the wonderful experience of falling in love and getting married, but being an astrologer and having the chance to live in a different part of the globe like that, and have it sort of my perspective adjusted by it was really valuable. Oh, you have an interesting question here. Patrick mentioned as above, so below earlier as a conceptual foundation. Would love to hear thoughts on using the non-precise zodiac rather than the actual current visible positions in the sky.
I think I can answer both of the previous questions with almost the same answer. So in regards to the question about the Southern Hemisphere, I think one of the interesting applications of that, or one of the interesting implications of charts in the global South, electionally speaking, but also natally speaking, is that the ascensions, the amount of time it will take for the signs to rise, would reverse. So in the northern hemisphere, Libra and Virgo take the longest amount of time to rise. They're the upright signs, and so signs which rise, that take the longest time to rise, and they rise most perpendicular to the horizon, they're going to be they are supposed to have this quality of representing things which are sort of stable or on firm ground, done the right proper way. Whereas the signs which are most slanted, the crooked signs, the most crooked would be Aries and Pisces, the opposite signs. Those are going to be the most slanted relative to the horizon, and they're going to also be the quickest to rise. And those can sometimes have connotations of speed, but also that something sort of off or a kilter about those signs. So in the late Hellenistic and medieval tradition of electional astrology, you'll often see astrologers discuss things about choosing a sign which is upright or crooked as a way of emphasizing certain qualities of speed and being upright, or being sort of crooked or fast. And so those positions are reversed in the global South, right? So Aries and Pisces become the upright signs in the global South, whereas Libra and Virgo end up taking on that sort of crooked quality. And so I think that has interesting implications then about like how much time a given planet will be the ruler of the ascendant in a given place. So Mercury and Venus are going to be the ascendant ruler more of the time in the global north, whereas Mars and Jupiter would the ruling planet of the ascendant for a greater period of time in the global south. So I thought that that's potentially interesting.
I know an astrologer in South Africa, Nathan Thaker, who Nathan Naker, who gave a really interesting talk where he argued that in the global south, you want to flip the zodiac, you know what I mean? Like Libras down there are Aries and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Which is, jarring, but he did make a really nice case. I'm not too, disturbed by it. It didn't like shake my foundations, but I did love hearing a really good argument for it.
Yeah. I think,
and it's something to sort of, not just turn your back on.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there's that. So this is now kind of addressing the second question, which is, why should the tropical zodiac be oriented to the northern hemisphere? Is that just a result of northern hemispheric bias? And, or is it arbitrary? Or maybe that's the same thing, right? So my response to that then is to find a way to anchor the tropical zodiac in something that's more that's based on something that's less arbitrary than our own arbitrary assignment of north and south on the planet Earth. And so one of the things I think is quite interesting is that if you look at the solar system's plane relative to our galaxies, if you look at the solar system relative to the galactic plane, it just so happens that our solar system is moving in the same direction that our north is. In essence, the northern hemisphere is like the front seat of our planet relative to the galactic plane. We're traveling northward, like what do they call it? The solar apex. The direction that our solar system is moving north. So north is the front of our car, and the south is the back. So I feel like when we take that into account, when we take in our position relative to the galactic plane, we have a less arbitrary way of saying that the northern hemispheric positioning of the zodiac is maybe the proper one, because it is the front of our planet as it moves through the galaxy, not just in the solar system. So, and as far as the idea of the tropical zodiac not representing the actual current visible positions in the sky, I reject that, because the intersection between the ecliptic and the equator, which defines 0 Aries and 0 Libra, that is a stable and observable phenomenon. I mean, obviously you can't look in the sky and go like, oh, that's the vernal equinox. But if you're tracking this thing day after day, it becomes a much more stable way of determining a beginning point for the zodiac. Much more so, really, in the long term than stars, because stars over the long term can drift apart. Where is 0 Aries when the zodiacal image of Aries, the constellational image of Aries, no longer exists? There are some visualizations of how the constellations will change in over tens of thousands of years, and they will drift apart. But the tropical zodiac would remain. For as long as the Earth orbits the sun, there will always be a tropical zodiac, and it will remain a reliable way of being able to, have coordinates for the planets.
It's a tiresome old argument, frankly. I mean, the one thing people can't seem to get their head around is that the constellations, we named the tropics after where the constellations were when the tropics were named. But even to this day, when we drove up from South Africa to Namibia, and we crossed the Tropic of Capricorn, there's a big sign there saying Tropic of Capricorn. The people who put that sign there are no more, pseudoscientific than astrologers. Like, it's, they know, the people who put the sign there know that that the solstitial point in December, does not intersect with the constellation Capricorn, but it's called that, and they have no trouble calling that on maps. and on road signs, and so it's
To be fair, to be fair though, some of this confusion is inevitable because we're still using those same names. And so
mhm,
something that I have very popularly recommended is that we have like a new naming system for the tropical divisions of the ecliptic,
yeah.
uh that would make it distinct from the constellational images they originally aligned with.
We could, or people could just try to be slightly less dim.
Yeah, I mean,
I
it takes a 2 second,
we could
2 seconds of effort.
yeah, we could rename everything, or we could just try to get the point across.
Right.
I don't know.
I even came up with like a few names for what the signs could be named.
Oh,
For example,
do tell us. Do tell.
well, for example, Aries, for example, is the home of Mars, right? Well, where is Mars most at home? Where is
The
where off?
battlefield.
Well, the arena, the
Okay.
arena. So I figured, well, maybe Aries could just be called
The
the
arena.
arena or arena.
What sign are you, baby? I'm an arena.
Arena. Yeah. Well,
Oh, watch out for those women with
but that's
Venus in
another.
arena.
Well, but this is another thing that I think kind of trips people up, which is that the signs are environments. They're not personalities. Like they're not
Yeah.
nouns.
No, they're places.
They're
They're
places. They
Yeah,
are
yeah.
environments. So Mars is the noun, right? Mars is the subject.
Yes.
Mars is the soldier or the gladiator or the the battler, and the arena is where they are at home.
Yeah.
That's where you'd expect to see a sword wielding dangerous person, is in the battlefield or
That's
in the
right.
boxing ring or in that kind of martial environment.
Yeah.
And so that's why Venus is out of place, in the arena,
Sure.
right? What's the model doing
Yeah.
in the boxing ring?
Right.
Okay, they look flashy, they can't punch, right?
Yeah.
They're going to mess up the makeup. It's not it's not a typical place you'd expect to see
I'm
that.
pretty sure I could have beaten up Marilyn Monroe. I mean,
let's keep the
sorry, that came
women
out the wrong
beating
way,
to
but
a minimum.
yes. Not that I ever would.
I'm
just saying,
joshing you,
I
Nick.
could take her in a fight. That's all I'm saying. I wouldn't throw the first punch. I'm not an animal. I'm just saying, like, if she came up to me and she's like, "Yo, Nick, what's up?"
Dig a little deeper.
Okay.
No, that's fine. Just kidding.
No.
I'm just I'm busting your chops. I think of so like in coming up with new names for the zodiac, I think, for example, Gemini, Mercury is like the writer, the reporter. Well, where is the reporter most at home? Well, I think of like a busy newsroom, phones going off and leads coming in and a lot of busyness and activity in that sign as information's flowing in and out. And so, where is that? Well, that's the media. Mercury is at home in the media. So you would call Gemini media. And you could say you have a median sun, meaning you have the sun in the sort of intellectually busy and sort of mutable environment of the newsroom. In any case, so a lot of my other ideas for the names of the signs, kind of follow a similar sort of thing. And I tried to sort of find words that had sort of a Latin or Greek kind of history, to sort of make it sound more like official, which is, my, I guess, Western civilization centric bias,
Sure.
showing.
Yeah.
So that's, not necessarily an ideal solution, but, we could always like have them just like named sectors, numbers for them or something. But that's kind of loses some of the connotations we have.
That was one of the reasons I assigned numbers and letters for the Venus, synodic map, because if you give them names, people will get too, it's like babies when you dangle keys over them. They get a little too sort of hypnotized by the symbolism, and you really want to get across the point that no, this is a space where planets come and go. In this case, Venus, and I think sometimes that's part of the problem I think we have with the whole correlation between the sidereal and tropical zodiac is when we use the constellation names in the tropical zodiac, they have this they have this appeal that gets you a certain distance, you know, like with sun signs, with like saying, oh yes, Leos are like cats because they're proud and like to show off, or this and that, and it'll get you a certain distance. But if you think you can sort of carry that way of operating into sort of you know, more advanced astrology, you're going to find that's baggage you're going to have to drop on your way forward at some point. That's
Although it's also weird how sometimes the zodiacal symbols make sense. Like we just talked about earlier about how Mars and Scorpio opposite Uranus was a
sure, yeah,
Scorpion
no, you get those
infestation. It can
moments.
be
You
so
get
you
those
get
moments.
to, and they still overlap, a little bit. It's just a little bit. But the divorce is coming. The tropical and sidereal zodiacs, they are barely hanging on. They're staying together for the kids. But eventually the kids are gonna move out, and they're gonna have to divide their assets and
But by the
decide
time
what
that's
belongs to what.
yeah, by the time that's fully separated, I hope humanity and astrology will have made, a significant leap in
Well,
their.
yeah. I mean,
But who
I
knows?
think it's kind of up to. I mean, not to imbue ourselves with so much importance, but I do feel like we have to be starting to think more seriously about not just saying that both can work, but more precisely why or
Yeah,
in which ways,
right.
or like
Yeah,
what belongs to what. Like, because I think there are certain things that belong to different paradigms. Like, obviously, the seasonality and the idea of like ascribing those kind of seasonal turning points to qualities of the signs, and that's actually the same whether or not you're northern or south of the
mm,
equator. Because uh, even if right now the south is experiencing the beginning of spring, it's still the same kind of turning point. It's still a cardinal,
sure.
point.
No, it
Um,
is. Yeah,
Even though we're experiencing the beginning of autumn here in the north. So like cardinal signs, fixed signs, and immutable signs, that those qualities of the signs are absolutely tropical. Like that's much harder, I think, to transplant into a
yeah,
sidereal context. That's not really applicable. And granted, while I'm not a sidereal user and I'm kind of coming at this as a kind of outsider in some ways from the sidereal zodiac, I think that one thing that could be helpful for the long-term viability of a sidereal zodiac would be to have a more definitive anchoring point in the same way that the tropical zodiac does. And one of my recommendation would be the galactic center, which very interestingly, the place where the galactic center currently is in the nakshatra that called Mula. I think that's how you pronounce it,
yeah.
which means the root, like the root of a
Mm.
tree, and that's the the center of the
The
galaxy. Now I don't
galactic.
know if that's just a coincidence
Well,
or
my
if maybe
my
they knew, because
my
we
my
didn't know that that was the center of the galaxy until the 50s, at least in the West.
my understanding of Vedic astrology is they do recognize and use the cardinal point, or at least the March equinox. Like it's still a thing in Vedic astrology, even if it's not like a, you know, incorporated it
Like a node almost,
like a
perhaps.
point. Yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
like it does have it's recognized. It's not
Okay.
it's not entirely discarded. My favorite argument for the sidereal zodiac against the tropical one. This is like a little haiku. I can't. Well, it's not a haiku, but this kind of thing. To remind myself before I get overly attached to my system just because it's mine. Um, in the sidereal zodiac, Charlie Chaplin has Mercury in Pisces, while Hitler has Mercury in Aries. Um, Tropically speaking, they both have Mercury in Aries. But I love the idea, these two guys whose charts are very similar, that the one who's famous for being, a silent movie star, someone who doesn't speak, has the Mercury in Pisces, whereas the guy who's famous first and foremost for giving really angry speeches, very vocal, as the Mercury in Aries.
So the
Um,
guy who has shut up and the guy who won't shut up.
Well, yeah, in a way.
Yeah.
I mean, because they are, I have this whole, I've studied both their lives and this way of comparing the two of them and their lives year to year. There's amazing stuff with the Venus cycle that you can look at.
Right.
But I just, that is something that doesn't come up. That doesn't surface in if you're just looking at tropical signs. That does surface in sidereal signs, and I do love that like to keep that in mind, so that even as I'm a quite a confirmed tropical astrologer, or astrologer who uses the tropical zodiac, I like to acknowledge like what my favorite argument against what I do is. And with that in mind, like in all my slides, I always include, I look at nakshatras, even alongside the tropical zodiac, which is, especially like in my Venus work, I like having those three circles because they're all sort of moving independently of each other, if you will. From a geocentric perspective, the Venus synodic cycle shifts and the zodiac shifts, and then of course the nakshatras shift. So like there's,
Right.
if you're looking over long periods of time, it's interesting to see how everything aligns. And I think the nakshatras can be very useful for Western astrologers. You don't have to be a sidereal, user to incorporate them.
Oh, that's an interesting idea, because I thought the nakshatras were kind of an explicitly sidereal construct, like.
They have their own construct. I mean, they're constructed from the stars, yes, but that's just it. It's a circle that you can use to look at the stars. There are more stars than constellations. In some cases they're stars, in some cases they're clusters. But it's a way of mapping out that very circle that the sidereal zodiac maps out, if you will. But it's a different way, and instead of having like these two 12-fold systems, like you got the tropical zodiac divided in 12 and the sidereal zodiac divided in 12. This way you've got the tropical zodiac as we use it, and then this other circle of 27 that's broken up in a different way, that moves of its own accord relative to everything else. Over time, with
I mean, I guess I tend to observe, I mean, I haven't done anything with Vedic astrology, so I'm in some ways, I imagine there's some people going like, why is this guy talking about something he doesn't know about anything about? But at least with stars, fixed stars, I just tend to observe those as being very, very slow moving points that move through the tropical zodiac. I still use the Earth-Sun relationship, the division of that relationship, as the primary way of tracking sort of long-term developments and progress of those stars. And I would think that in the long term, perhaps the passage of different fixed stars through different tropical signs would contribute to different qualities that tropical sign would have in different eras. So maybe, pardon me, with maybe Leo is always a solar sign, but maybe in a different era where you had Stegosaurus walking around. Maybe Leo is a more maybe with those other stars would have been present in Leo at the time. Maybe that's a different type of Leo, a different type of tropical solar sign,
sure,
as opposed to being a cat feline like sign, right? That's obviously
back in the days when Antares was in Leo or whatever.
And maybe there were maybe like, so I mean it's shades of difference, and it's in some ways it's kind of impossible to truly differentiate, because we'd be comparing completely different eras where we have no
I just mean like insofar as like the distance I've gone so far studying the Venus synodic cycles, where I'm looking at 300-400 years of history, and just to that extent that I can track what precession we've had over time, and when I'm looking at different charts, in the same way that today a red 5 Venus cycle, you'll get people with the sun in Leo. 400 years ago during a red 5 you could get someone with the sun in Scorpio, but similarly the nakshatras could be just slightly different in place to place, where they were 400 years ago as opposed to where they are today.
I'm a prime candidate really to become a sidereal astrologer, because my sidereal chart looks a lot better in many ways than my tropical chart.
I mean, I guess
I
that's one
resisted
reason
the temptation for a better chart.
I make it a point to not be like, I have my method and the way I use it, and I have my system, the one I swear by, but I make it a point to not be orthodox, if you will. Like, I like reading. uh, I like reading Vedic material. I like learning what I can from different astrologies. Um, yeah, I don't like to sort of live in some gated, kind of realm where
Right.
I don't let outside ideas seep in. So I think, yeah, that's an important. I think at some point in your development, you do need to put the blinders on just to sort of get good at your little sort of territory. But then
Right.
at some point, you also want to sort of open it up again.
Right. I feel like I've kind of walked a line of, on the one hand, wanting to be able to just learn as much as possible within one tradition. I mean, I don't currently have plans to, you know, you could spend several lifetimes, studying this stuff.
Yeah.
But I haven't had plans to like try to go into a different area of astrology just yet. But I think the one thing that I think I do, which you actually really are the person that sort of opened me up towards, is, as people know who've heard me kind of describe my journey in astrology, really, Chris Brennan and Nick, were my kind of really
Parents.
closest thing to, yeah, my kind of astrological mentors. Chris is my big brother, and Nick is my astrological father, and they both have had a huge impact on my own sort of astrological approach. Nick is the person that I kind of have this, rather, Chris is the person I sort of have this appreciation for, the sort of historical and ancient tradition of astrology that is really the kind of cornerstone of a lot of my astrological work. But I also recognize that there's also this assumptionless astrology. There is this astrology which is divorced from any particular tradition and just looking at what actually happens, this sort of exoteric approach, and that's has been massively influential to me as well. Like, so even though I know, like, okay, we have perfections, we have house rulerships, and we have these sort of technical things in astrology that tell us one thing should be one way, I also have this awareness at the same time, and it's almost contradictory at times, but like knowing, like, okay, even though this is not like a perfected transit, this person's born at a Jupiter Uranus conjunction, and another Jupiter Uranus conjunction is happening here. Like, that's a
Right.
recurrence transit, even if there isn't like a direct line of sight or aspect or anything. We just know it's part of this. Part of the way astrology operates is through these kinds of recurrences and repetitions and phases repeating that have sort of similar qualities. And I think parts of these things are baked into the astrological methods and techniques we have, but other things are just kind of their own thing. I mean, you could almost have an entire astrology just based off of Venus, for example.
Yeah.
And the Mesoamerican traditions of astrology kind of are like that. They're very kind of Venus centric almost.
Yeah.
Um,
Probably just synodic cycles, generally speaking, but Venus being the brightest. Yeah.
so so I definitely appreciate that, and I think there's so many mysteries still to be tackled there, and so much fruitful insights have come from looking at astrology in this sort of ex-traditional or a-traditional or assumptionless or exoteric way. Kind of a little more, in some ways, like you've described it. You've just sort of described yourself as a neo-Babylonian
Yeah. Yeah.
astrologer.
Exactly. Sort of not trying to absolutely replicate, the the era. I mean, like, it would be
Yeah,
absurd just to call
you're
myself
not
a
building a
Babylonian.
ziggurat or something,
No, not on purpose anyway. Yeah, but just sort of like picking up where I think they left off, or approaching it in a similar way that I imagine they developed their astrology. Yeah. I wanted to Me 444 is talking about the crazy bookshelf. It's been explained on the live stream before. I just unpacked these these books behind me were in a locker for 6 years, and I unpacked them in June, and we dusted them off and put them on the shelf. But I know we're not going to be living in this townhouse for that much longer. At best, a few more months, maybe a year. But in other words, I haven't been in a big rush to sort of settle in. My life is very fluid and on the move, and so organizing these books would just be too much of a commitment for too short a time. But I know it kind of looks unsightly, and I've been live streaming with them like that behind me for a few months now, so maybe I have to organize them just for like, the silly, just to get people to stop commenting on them. It does look like a shit show, I'll admit.
Someone said, if you guys want to waste some time arguing about a random topic, you can rehash the whole sign houses thing. Haha. Well, I guess since we talked about tropical versus sidereal, I mean, I guess we could talk a little bit about house divisions, but I actually think we have a pretty similar
I don't
perspective
have
on houses.
I don't have anything to argue about. Really.
I think, I mean, to me, I use houses, the whole sign houses topically, and I use the angles as a secondary kind of reference point. It's not, I don't use them topically necessarily, but I do think that planet's position relative to an angle reflects whether or not it's coming into greater prominence in a life or whether it's receding in sort of effect. Essentially, if a planet is rising up towards the degree of the ascendant, then it's angular, dynamically angular. Even if it's not in the first whole sign house, for example, if it's in the second, it could still be angular, but relevant for second house topics. So I use the signs for topics, like what area of life it's about, and I use the angles as almost like a power gauge. And now, having said that, if a planet is on the midheaven and it's in a different whole sign house, I'm still going to interpret that with some measure of what that angle is pertinent towards. What would you say, Nick?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I use whole sign houses, but then the angles are something that I sort of throw in as well. Can you see this thing I'm sharing?
Yeah.
I went into Midjourney last year, and I typed in astrologers arguing over houses, and this is what I got. Anyway, there's the whole sign houses, and then exactly as you describe, and then you have the angles, and the angles sort of, they can be first 10th or first 11th or first 9th, and that's something that'll sort of address itself in the life. It'll become clear why there's an 11th house midheaven as opposed to a 10th house one.
I mean, there's a lot more one could say on this topic. I obviously, without getting too into it, I do think that some of the claims that were made about whole sign houses that were not historically supportable, obviously I very strongly disagree with that. Whole sign houses existed regardless of whether or not honestly, I wouldn't have cared if Ms. Holding had released a talk just saying, like, I hate whole sign houses and here's why. I honestly wouldn't have cared. All right, fine. You don't have use whatever one you want. But
I have only one thing to say on that matter. It's June of 1999, and I've just arrived in Cumberland, Maryland and I've just met Robert and Ellen Schmidt for the first time in June of 1999.
Spill the tea.
And there and then, that, like, as I met them, on that first day I ever met them, they were in the middle of this huge brouhaha with Deborah Holding over something they had written in response to something she had written about houses and whole sign houses. This has been going on for a long time, longer than some of you watching have been alive, I hate to say.
Longer than when I was officially into astrology.
You were 11 years old when in June of 99 when I went.
I was getting pantsed in Germany while that was happening.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's been going on a long time, and that was my reaction to the whole thing coming up. It's like,
It's just
really,
like, oh
again?
yeah,
Oh,
again.
like, is it really just
Right.
1999 again? Why don't we, like, I don't know.
Right. What I did think was really interesting though is that the original talk that ended up like spurring, this whole war, occurred in the lead up to Mars going retrograde in Gemini, and then it was at around the direct station of Mars in Gemini that it was made public to a broader audience, because before it was like only available to, I guess, to a few people, but then it became like a more public thing at that point, and that's when those divisions sort of really broke out. So this kind of fits in with an observation that we've had about Mars, which is that the retrograde period itself isn't always in
It's
some
like
ways the
drawing. It's
worst.
drawing back the string. It's when it
Yeah,
goes direct.
it's
That's
pulling
the
back
arrow.
the
Yeah,
arrow.
yeah.
It's when Mars goes direct. That's when
It's got
shit
this
goes
force to it.
boom.
Yeah.
That's
As I've stated a few times here and on the astrology podcast, every time the U.S. Has been attacked, it's been after Mars has gone direct. This is true for 9/11, the 93 attack on the Twin Towers, the what was the Timothy McVeigh, his bombing in 95, Pearl Harbor, like, you name it.
yeah.
It's always, within like 2 months or so after within 2 months of a Mars direct station.
Chat GPT would only very reluctantly agree with that.
Yeah,
Even
yeah.
when it was presented with the evidence, it's like, that
I
may be so, but I still
yeah.
don't think
I
that
totally
means what you think it does.
Patrick and I were arguing with GPT about astrology, and I pointed out that this was the case, and Chat GPT was having none of it.
But to speak more broadly to like the idea of like different house systems, I mean, I think if you look at the way each one is calculated, if you look at the sort of underlying assumption of each one, they have their own logical, internal consistency. For example, Placidus is more or less following the planetary hours. It's dividing the time of day versus night evenly, and that's the same calculation we use for planetary hours. So I would think that you could probably just use it more or less as a kind of hour system, and almost consider it a kind of like horizontal bounds system, if you like, since it divides up the hours. If you like divide a Placidus house into two, you're essentially, you can tell what the planetary hour ruler is, based on where the sun is. So it's that I'm not saying like other house systems are wrong. The only thing that I guess I'm sort of more positively stating is that I think that it still makes the most sense to me that the division of the ecliptic and its relationship to the horizon is what gives us the house meanings, and that the terrestrial frame of reference, as indicated by the the meridian and where that falls, is telling us a different piece of information. It's telling us how the ecliptic intersects with the terrestrial, and that perhaps those different frames of reference suggest a kind of default baseline of destiny versus some way that things actually fall out, almost like a lot. Like the midheaven could almost be considered like a lot, in that way. And Robert Hand sort of made comments similar to that I think are quite interesting.
Yeah. Real Darko Art said, love the astrodrama, but I got to tell you, I don't love the astrodrama. It's such a waste of time and resources. And, people just go off and have your own work. And if you don't like each other, stay the hell away. It sucks up a lot of oxygen.
The 6-hour burn session was truly, Chris Brennan's finest hour in some ways, finest 6 hours. It was, an incredible epic, takedown that was, necessary to fully explain why a lot of the claims were wrong. And, obviously, there were going to be some people who disagree with that, but, and there were some people even trying to criticize him for the length of the amount of time he took to do this. But I think it was it was necessary, and I very much enjoyed watching it. Having said that, while that felt cathartic, ideally, I just wish that none of it
Yeah,
had
I think
happened
it's.
to
I
begin
think
with.
it's a. Yeah, ultimately, I.
Ultimately,
It's but
there's
everyone
there's bigger
involved.
problems.
Everyone involved could have been served much better doing other things.
But I mean, I think it was important that there was a response, as
I
detailed
mean, sure,
as that. It was necessary,
sure,
but it was necessary. But I, yeah. I mean, ideally, I would have preferred that the
yeah,
initial claims weren't made, and that we could just be doing our best to do the best astrology we can. Ultimately, we have bigger problems than each other. We uh,
yeah, yeah,
there's astrologers have bigger fish to fry
yeah,
than
yeah,
each other.
yeah. Just wait till the right wingers, really find out about us, and they'll forget all about trans kids and come after us instead. That could easily happen. You know,
I
like
mean,
I mean, like
yeah, I mean, there's no bounds. I mean, basically, yeah, trans kids are that's the canary in the gold mine for civil
yeah.
rights, on every
Yeah,
level.
yeah, yeah,
That's
yeah.
why
That's
it's important
people
to,
people are not really caring anymore.
if you can establish an arbitrary reason to discriminate against a group of people, well, then you've just made it possible for yourself
Yeah,
to eventually
yeah,
come into the fire. No matter what privileged position you have in society, the fascists come for you eventually.
yeah.
There's no place safe. There's just delaying the inevitable if you let that happen at any level. So yeah, it's really important to
That's right.
provide
I,
that
I,
support
I,
for.
I, while it was hopeful on my part to suggest that they would forget about them, obviously, I don't think that's likely, although desirable. But my point being, insofar as you get like just this crowd of outraged people who just can't bear the thought of another group of people existing, I think it can easily come to the point where astrologers also fall into that category.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, I mean, I don't like to think about that, but it's true. I think uh, I think we occupy such a strange space right now where astrology is sort of more popular than it's ever been, but it also kind of makes me nervous.
Yeah, yeah,
It makes me nervous. I feel like astrology has in some ways been safer on the fringes when it's not taken so seriously by broader society. And while I would like astrology to sort of, have, some respect, I also just know that, this is such a kind of radical proposition that astrology makes in some ways that, at least compared to the sort of mainstream assumptions of civil society. I mean, for example, if more people took astrology seriously, would they still believe in elections? Or would they believe in monarchies instead if they don't think their vote matters? Because it's all predestined. I mean, astrologers still vote, but if I sometimes wonder if it would actually be better for society if everyone actually took some of these things to the kind of logical extremes, because I feel like that would kind of result in like anti-democratic outcomes, small d, anti-democratic outcomes. Um, but even though I am a slightly harder determinist, I still vote because even if I think that things are fated, uh, even if I know in the back of my mind that things are fated, I'm still destined to go through the experience of making choices and perceiving a kind of causality from thing to thing. So I still try my best
well, yeah,
to make the best choices I can, even if I know in the back of my mind that this is like probably already in the stars, as it were.
right, right. Yeah, no, I mean, you can't just give up, obviously. Um,
Mhm.
but yeah, I I don't know what to say. I find the whole thing so irritating and pointless. So that's what I think. Um, someone said,
I'm not
uh,
the president of ISAW. No, I'm not the president of ISAW. That's
he's the
Clarissa Dolphin.
no, he's the president of astrology. All right,
No,
you will bow before him.
yeah, my wife has loved that. Call me the president.
And
No, I,
to answer your question, sir, in order to get him on the show, I had to sleep with him. Okay,
no.
are you
Oh
happy?
my god.
Are you happy?
Oh
All right.
no. I'm the president. I am the president of Cap ISA. That's they had to, because of some legal reasons, they had to separate the certification branch of ISA from the main organization. So that's what I'm the president of. I'm the president of the separated limb of ISA that deals specifically with certifying professional astrologers. I haven't even had one meeting yet. Like this news just literally came out a few days ago that I was voted. So I've just been like reading the bylaws and just basically getting ready to hear about what the next steps are, and meeting everyone and trying to learn everyone's names and figure out how or if I can be helpful. Obviously, my my overall goal would be to just probably to update and help modernize the exams, improve the exams, and hopefully improve them in various ways. Uh, the ISAR exam, if I remember, it was like 6 hours long. It was actually quite hard. It was quite hard to complete. I needed every last second because there were a lot of written sections. This probably took me the longest. So I'm kind of interested in sort of crowdsourcing some ideas from the board.
Did you have to do all that writing by hand, or are you allowed
No,
to
it was
type
on the
it?
it was on the
Okay.
computer, and honestly,
Okay.
that was part of the reason why I was able to actually go forward with getting certified, because I'd actually wanted to get my certification exams done a long time ago, but a lot of them required that you had to go in person to like various conferences, and that
Yeah.
wasn't really doable for me at the time due to cost and scheduling. I was still like a teacher at the time, so I just kind of put it off and put it off and put it off, and then of course it was COVID, and so I definitely wasn't going to be going anywhere then. And then they finally moved the testing online, so that's when I was able to get
Okay.
my NCGR
I'm glad they did that.
cert, and yeah, and the Cap ISA cert, and I'm hoping they can do the same thing for AFA and the other one, so that I can because I'd like
NCGR.
to. Yeah, I'd like to be certified with all of the different organizations and kind of go as high as I can. I don't know
Yeah.
why, just
No,
maybe
it's
to show off,
no.
but
I think you
to
the
prove that sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say the value in taking those exams is how you learn and grow and studying for them and taking them. I don't, certification, schmertification. I mean, sure, it's useful, but like in terms of like if you're really vested in the the growth and development of your skill and knowledge as an astrologer, taking the test, I mean, obviously I'm joking about blowing off the certification, but it's the process, it's doing the task and completing it, how it changes you and how you grow. I think that's the value. When I did the NCGR exams, I mean, I was yeah, it felt like I was getting like a dose of steroids, of astrological steroid knowledge jammed into me. It was always like a huge leap that early on in my development.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's certainly that value to it. I think the other kind of critical component for this is because astrology has been left outside of academia for a few centuries now. um, there's not as concrete a way to say I really know what I know, and that I have reached a sort of level of proficiency and I'm accountable to sort of some kind of standard. And a lot of people resist this idea because they feel like this can be perceived as like gatekeeping, and not respecting the individual preferences or approaches of astrologers. I think there's some degree of resistance to the idea of standardization, but I think especially if we're anticipating potentially a more hostile environment as a kind of reaction to the mainstream popularity of astrology, then I think it's going to be more important that that astrologers regulate themselves because I'd rather us regulate ourselves than be regulated by someone else. And I would prefer then that we, try to, be able. This is another way that we can kind of push back against the rise of scammers and fraudsters. Sometimes can try to pass themselves off as astrologers, and so it will a little bit of Saturn, a little bit of definition surrounding what an astrologer is or what a professional astrologer should be able to do or should know is good. It's and I love astrologers. I think they're great people. You get some really interesting folks in this mercurial field as well. And I want us all to do really well. And I think one way that we can do that is by making sure that we, at some point in our studies, if we want to continue to, to be a professional astrologer, we should try to meet some standard. Because I think there's sometimes gaps in our knowledge that you sometimes don't anticipate, not knowing, because it may just not be part of your regular practice. But like, for example, a lot of astrologers should have some working knowledge of like various astronomical concepts, which are fundamental to, understanding a chart. You shouldn't just know how to look at a 2D chart. You should understand what those things correspond to in 3D space. And sometimes, skeptics kind of hammer, astrologers on these kinds of things. And so I just want us to be, able to be kind of resilient and prepared, for a more critical environment potentially. So I mean, it sounds a little spooky, but we were just talking about astrologers being targeted by things. So
no, it's absolutely. I mean, that's the reason why these things exist in the first place. We got orgs. You had the likes of Alan Leo and Evangeline Adams, being taken to court, and if those kind of things happened again, it would really help to have the power of an org behind you to help you with legal defense and logistical defense and all that.
Yeah.
You all right there?
Yeah. I'm just reading through the comments. GF Martello, I'm super proud of passing NCGR PA level 1. You should be. That's a hard test. I grew so much over that period. I'm excited to go back and do more. Me too. Someone said, Barbara says, please don't change the suggested reading list as a student prepping for the test. If anything, it might be added to. But I mean, I'm still, this is early days. I don't exactly know.
It'll take a while to institute all that,
to even figure out what needs to be improved.
How long is the term? How long are you president for?
Until the deluge of planets through Aries in 2025.
Oh, okay.
That's the end of.
It's a year and a half. Okay.
That's the end of the former president's term,
right,
and at that point, I would face a general election. So then people would actually get right now. I'm just the replacement. I'm the Gerald Ford right now.
You're the Lyndon Johnson, right?
Yeah. I'm just the appointment. I'm not actually elected by the membership at large. So that's when I would need your vote if I was to decide to continue in the office. So we'll see what happens.
All right. Well, just don't get in any sex scandals or whatever. Porn stars.
I am so I'll try to avoid that. I just know that's. I guess I've just seen that. I've seen sex scandals in my life, not involving me, but just involving sort of people I know or even in my family. That it just seems like the most avoidable scandal in some ways. It just seems like I've just kind of vowed, and especially because of everything with my father, I've kind of vowed that that's just never going to be a thing that happens to me. Now, hopefully that clip of me doesn't become an immortal, clip.
Remember that time when
he said that will never happen to me, and here he is.
And then he turned into the world's biggest philanderer.
Here's him DMing someone. Yeah, you will never receive a DM from me. Yeah, we'll never be sliding into anyone's DMs for any reason other than like an astrological question or something along those lines. I will never be.
But Patrick, you told me you loved me.
Yeah, the only person's DMs I'm sliding into is my wife's.
All right, right.
But yeah, I'm. Yeah,
and occasionally we slide into each other's DMs to say, "Hey, are you ready to live stream?"
Sure, yeah.
Oh yeah, we're about to live stream. Let's do it.
You know, no leaked dick pics coming from me.
Okay, all right. We get it.
Okay.
Someone mentioned that everybody studies the war, but no one studies Weimar Germany. So I thought, well, you know, someone has studied Weimar Germany, and that's someone might have a whole slideshow of German leaders and their Venus intervals during Weimar. It's my shitty old files where the number is blurry, the blue part is blurry there, but these are the people, the presidents, and then all the different chancellors, the first, the second, the third, the fourth chancellor, the fifth. This is how many Weimar chancellors you got. The sixth, the seventh. This was the one guy that considered a winner, but he died too young. This is the one guy who could have saved Germany. The seventh chancellor of the Weimar Republic in less than a decade. And then the eighth chancellor, and then the ninth, and then 10th, and this guy. And this is the guy who handed it over to Hitler. So yeah, that you can say that no one ever studies Weimar, but I have. Yeah, relative to the rest of Germany, there's some interesting stuff there. Coming soon on a video. I'm working on a bunch of slides. I've decided what I have to do with my videos is make them, make vertical versions anyway. I'm working on, I've been long working on these horizontal ones, but also to make the vertical ones for things like TikTok, because it's just the exposure is too huge.
Yeah.
So I've been making all these slides for that, and they're looking great. If anything, I've improved on my formula, and I think I'm going to be able to, I'm getting close to the point where I'm going to be able to produce a lot, but I need to make all these slides. It's so time consuming before I start churning out the stories. But
make sure you throw in a few TikTok dances in there with the trending songs, so that you know.
Yeah, no, look, you see all kinds of stuff on TikTok. It's not just people dancing to silly songs.
No, I know.
I might do some dancing to silly songs.
Yeah.
I'm a free-spirited guy.
Just that's just one of the tropes of the platform. But
no, I know.
Yeah, I actually already am on TikTok. P Watson Astro on TikTok. I have not uploaded any videos yet because I'm like still figuring everything out. I'm still working on my stupid site, and I'm still working on like revamping my YouTube. But like I too will be coming up with more sort of regular video content, just to stay active and out there. But I haven't been active on YouTube for several years, aside from doing these live streams. So
yeah, I did put my intro to the Venus synodic cycle on TikTok. I made a vertical.
I don't even think I fully on TikTok. Yeah, I didn't realize you actually have already.
That video I put on TikTok like last December, whenever I made it.
Okay.
I've been working on a lot of slides so that I can churn out a lot of really great videos in all the formats. And yeah, it's looking very cool. So stay tuned for that. I know it takes me a lot of time. People are always asking, when are you doing this? When are you doing that? I just want to do a good job. So that's all.
So B Havens is saying the comment is in relation to how the Weimar Republic went from an open society to a fascist one. Hence, the first they came for the trade unionists, but I did not belong to a trade union, so I did not speak out, etc.
It's important. Like, this is the thing: if you study Germany as a whole, not just Nazi Germany or modern Germany or Weimar Germany, but even the imperial Germany, when you really understand how uptight these poor people were, and then you had the war, and suddenly the empire is gone, the Kaiser's gone, and there's nothing, and suddenly there's jazz and homosexuals and women smoking, and oh my God, and
cabaret, basically.
yeah, cabaret.
Yeah.
I mean, but it went from super uptight, super homophobic, and like toxic masculinity, like
Dialed up
imperial,
to 11.
yeah, the imperial Germany. Like we're talking on a scale that I don't care what part of America you in, you haven't seen imperial Germany level toxic masculinity.
Bismarckian level.
Yeah, you've seen some LARPers, you've seen some, there's some American fascists who wish they were like up to that alpha male level of toxic masculinity of Weimar Germany, of Imperial Germany, but they're not there yet. It's crazy. And so, like the war ends. And importantly, the First World War, unlike the Second World War, the First World War, Germany was barely touched. Like France was destroyed, but this was part of like why there were such hard feelings, was that, and why Germany paid such a heavy toll, because they, in the Second World War, they were bombed to smithereens, but they still had their infrastructure and everything. And then, yeah, Berlin just became this, overnight, this democratic town and all this stuff happening. And it freaked out the reactionaries. So it's to really get why Weimar Germany was, such a precarious position, you really got to have a sense of what Berlin had been, what Prussia had been before even the unification of Germany.
I mean, in
the
some ways, then
with the
I'm
spikes on the
surprised.
helmet and all that.
I mean, in some ways, then I'm surprised. In some ways, that the conservative backlash to the '60s wasn't worse.
Yeah, well, it was bad.
I mean, it was bad. It was bad. I mean,
bad.
the '80s was pretty bad, but I mean, it wasn't. But it didn't turn into like, I mean, unless I like have like recency bias or something like that, it doesn't seem like the '80s or '70s to '80s was necessarily quite as bad as what happened to the Weimar Republic, turning into Nazi Germany.
I think the interesting thing about the culture war in the U.S. in the '70s is, the right wingers sort of won their political battle, but they lost the cultural battle, which was, very West. I mean, think of how many right wing American politicians have wanted to use, a song, and then the artist is like, "There's no way you're using my song," like Sarah Palin and Heart's Barracuda or whatever.
Yeah.
But the whole culture, from the Beatles to hip hop to everything, had a sort of, even if it wasn't sort of declaratively left wing, it just sort of, the cultural values were certainly
and that's where the whole anxiety comes, about.
Well, that's why we are where we are today. Yeah. Precisely because they have a sense like they, I mean, even, the Soviet Union, okay, like it wasn't Reagan who really ended the Cold War in the Soviet Union. I mean, he did his part, but it was the Beatles. It was Beatles, and it was Blue Jeans, and it was McDonald's. In other words, ironically enough, capitalism, and that's the whole thing. Like, all the military intrigue and the espionage intrigue, and the nuclear weapons. Like, if you really believed in capitalism as a system, then you would be comfortable letting it fight its own battles. You know what I mean? Which is clearly all that you ever needed to do. You didn't need to like overthrow governments and all the stuff. You could have just, if you really believed in capitalism, you could have just let it go out and win the war on its own, which is ultimately, how it really went down.
Yeah, although sometimes it doesn't work out. Because in the '70s, you also had, like in Iran, for example, that's an example of.
But that's an example of the Cold War meddling causing a much bigger problem. Because look, when Mossadegh wasn't a communist, but because he wanted to nationalize the Persian oil. The Americans threw in a coup, and the Shah was installed. But this was out of, even though he hadn't been a communist, just the threat of nationalizing an industry like that was communist enough. And so if it hadn't been for all this sort of, Cold War maneuvering, you wouldn't have had the revolution in '78. It was a very liberal place, but it was, people had a sense that they were being controlled from the outside, and that's ultimately what turned them upside down.
And they weren't completely wrong about that.
No, I don't think were. No, I don't like how the revolution turned out, but I never thought for a minute that people were wrong for
for
uprising.
feeling that the U.S. was meddling in
Yeah,
their
no,
affairs, because it was.
things had gone very, very wrong.
Right.
David has a question here. Hi, Nick. I was wondering about, could you do a country analysis like I did for U.S., France, and Russia for any country? What information and resources do I require? Well, David, that is something I'm working on. I have a lot of books. I mean, a lot of books, and I'm getting close to having at least one good history of every country in the world. There's only like a few that I'm missing, but it's a slow and gradual process, but I've made more progress in the last couple of years than I'd made before. But yeah, it's just a matter, like I was showing you with Germany. I'm doing my best to branch out and study a lot of national histories. I'm getting pretty good with South Africa, China, India. I'm reading more and more about Latin America. I know that's where you are, and I want to know every part of that continent, and the regional histories and the astrology behind them. So I'm getting there, but it's
Yeah.
taking time.
What Nick really needs is a Neuralink and a server farm and a AI augmentation to his already ridiculous brain.
Well,
and
no, I mean,
to offload some of the processing of this data,
I
a
no, I
floating
think
brain.
no, other people are going to pick up where I left off. Look, I got lucky when I started studying astrology in 95. I got solar fire in 1999 on this tiny little compact desktop computer that had like zero power, but I was running solar fire version 4, and I started my database then. Just started making charts and saving them into files. But I came along right at a time where this technology, that was right when version 4 of solar fire came out. So I really started doing this right when technology became possible for me to start doing it. There's a lot of other people, if the technology had existed 20 years earlier, no doubt that your Robert Hands and whoever of the world would have approached this in a similar way. So now here we are, 25 years later, or 24 years later, and technology is accelerating further. And I think the more tools we have at our disposal, the more people like who I was in 99, just taking advantage of the moment. It's not unlike when Galileo used, he made that telescope to see the moons of Jupiter. The technology for him to have that telescope only just came into the lenses and what have you, everything for him to have that telescope that enabled him to see the moons of Jupiter. That technology was brand new. So, we can praise Galileo, I mean, deservedly, for what he did, but if that technology had been available 50 years earlier, it would have been some other person, to do it. So yeah, technology is taking us in an interesting direction. But in terms of what I've done, I did the most with what I could do with what I had in 1999. And now things are accelerating in this exciting way. I'm really proud to still be participating in that, although I'm at the other end of it. But yeah, hopefully more than anything is that we can inspire young astrologers to take up this mantle, because ultimately it's not just down to me and my brain. This is going to be something that astrologers probably over generations have to work out.
You still have several acts.
Well,
you're not at the end of your run. You got a strong second act at least.
Yeah. Well, thank you, David, saying, as my only Ecuadorian client. How do you know you're my only Ecuadorian client? Maybe I've told him that. It turns out he is, but not my only one in South America. But if I need any help with smaller South American countries, let me know. Thank you, David. I'm definitely, I've read 3 biographies of Bolivar, to get my head around that, and a few different books about the revolutions that erupted, after Napoleon and everything. I've read some books in Brazil. Definitely want to read more about Ecuador, but I'm kind of long. I'll let you know if I need any help. Thank you.
Speaking of South America,
yes.
One story that's been talked about quite a bit, which, I mean, maybe it's nothing, maybe it's something, still seems worthy of note. that these bodies that were recovered from some grave robbery in Peru were presented
Yeah,
to the Mexican Congress and
that's
purported to
not.
be
No,
uh,
yeah.
non-human beings.
It made some good morning entertainment. That's not, look, there's some very interesting things going on in that whole sphere right now.
Right.
And they're very, I don't know, like all this testifying going on in Congress and what have you. But that thing with the bodies was a hoax. That was just a full on hoax.
Uh, the yeah, I mean, I would
Uh,
tend to be more skeptical of that. The the most recent I'd heard is that they're continuing to do sort of scans and testing of these things,
no,
but I think even if all of that is just a total mirage. There are other really weird things that sort of came about really at the beginning of Venus retrograde with this
yeah, no,
guy Dave Grush.
yeah. There are more
Um,
interesting things. I'm sorry you let off with the silly corpses
oh,
because
well, well, I was
that
just
was real. That was
reminded of that.
oh, look! Someone, a 5-year-old made a little maquette of an ET. How cute! And they're showing
Yeah,
it to the
well, yeah,
Mexican
I mean,
Parliament.
okay, so maybe I led into it badly, and I don't know exactly how prepared we are to talk on this because it's actually a pretty huge topic. But
Yeah, no, it is. It is. But
yeah,
that's
I mean,
yeah.
basically, if for anyone who has been living under a rock, we basically have one of the most credible sources ever, officially testifying under oath to the U.S. Congress about the existence of UAP crash retrievals and the discovery of bodies, non-human bodies, with these craft. And I've actually, I don't talk about this very much, but I do have a pretty deep interest in this topic. I mean, I've always kind of been drawn to the, I watched X-Files as a kid. I thought that was absolutely fascinating, and I loved all of Close Encounters and ET. So
Mhm.
I like most most people, consuming Western media. I'm very accustomed to this idea of aliens and space travel and all of this kind of stuff. But I did, for whatever it's worth. I mean, it was August 1st, 2010, around sunset, that I was walking home with my brothers. We had just watched the movie Dinner for Schmucks at the movie theater because I was working at the movie theater and I got free tickets, and so we went to see it. It
Are
wasn't
you
that
sure you
funny.
didn't see the movie theater while you were having dinner with schmucks?
Yeah, it was Dinner for Schmucks, and we were walking back because I lived close enough to the movie theater to walk, and I noticed on the horizon there was this bright red light that looked very strange, and it started moving very erratically, and we were all reacting simultaneously to what we were seeing, and it actually came overhead. It was very clearly a metallic disc with these like red lights around it, and came directly overhead, and it looked like it was going to land. And we were just shocked by this and just like screaming, just swearing. This is just wild. That this craft was this close to us and was behaving so strangely, and so we ended up running. We ran because we felt like it was going to land like on top of us. We felt like we had to run, so we started running, and these other sort of small lights appeared sort of around it, and eventually got higher and higher and higher, and then it just flew right up like in an instant. And we were just so shaken by the sighting that there was like a Burger King right there, so we like just had some Burger King and just like discussed what we just seen. But it was a real event and it really happened, and I don't think it would make sense to say that it was like a military craft. I don't know why a military aircraft would be going to civilian airspace like that, and seemingly tracking three guys. It just doesn't make any sense. It was very weird, and it did feel like we were being observed. So it was a real experience. And you said you've seen some weird things, right?
Yeah, in June of 2011, about 10 months after you saw yours, It was a Saturday night. I was at a friend's house in Montreal watching a hockey game, and then the game was over, and he was going to go off to the local bar, and I was going to go home. So I said goodbye to him, and I was walking, for people who know Montreal, I was walking across Fletcher's Field, which is across the street from Mount Royal. It's a mountain in the middle of the city. And it was relatively early, maybe 10 o'clock on a Saturday night in June. So there was still a lot of people out and around, and everyone, including myself, saw that up on Mount Royal, just next to the cross that's on the mountain. On Mount Royal, there's this lit cross. It's like over 100 feet high. And hovering just next to the cross was this big disc-looking object with 3 red lights on it, and it was just hovering there. And you could tell it was really big, because even though it was at the top of the mountain from a distance, I've stood at the cross, as Montrealers do, and it's really high. And so you could see like this thing
had to be
very
sizable,
like, comparably 100 feet high and that much wider, and what have you.
Right.
So yeah, that was, and we were all sort of, Montrealers don't really talk to each other on the street much, but we were all like going up to each other like, hey, do you see that? What is that? There was kind of this moment,
It broke Canadian decorum.
Well, in Montreal, Montreal's different, because,
okay.
because the language barrier. You never know what language the person next to you speaks, and so if you speak to them in the wrong language, it could go really bad. So it doesn't.
Regardez-vous.
Yeah, no, it's a Montreal thing.
Yeah.
But anyway, long story short, we were all sort of talking to each other. As it turns out, most of us were bilingual, and it's not a problem. But yeah, the next day there was nothing in the paper or anything. I was sure it would be like this major story, and there was nothing in the paper about it. No one seems to have talked about it, but I know, like, I saw it, and a lot of people around saw it. So it did show to me, not just like, I had always swore like, okay, I'm not gonna take any of this stuff seriously unless I actually see one. And then I saw one, and I'm still like, okay, I still don't know what to take seriously, because there are things
right.
like the corpses in that were taken.
I mean,
from
there's
Peru
a lot
and
of there's a really interesting article on this topic by the astrologer Dan Waits. It's on his Substack, and it's talking about the UFO phenomenon in terms of being a manifestation of the Neptune-Pluto cycle, because the Neptune-Pluto conjunction in the late 1890s coincides with the beginning of the modern UFO phenomenon, the airships phenomenon, the very comparable types of sightings. But of course, this was happening in the this is before
the Wright brothers.
Wright brothers. This is before there was anything in the sky. So how do you account for this? And so it's an interesting thing that this conjunction happened around 8 degrees of Gemini, because at the beginning of this year, Mars stationed direct around 8 degrees of Gemini. And what happened in the news at that time? There were these mystery Chinese balloons that they shot down over Alaska, and there was this kind of confusion, because it's square Neptune, about whether or not they were like Chinese spy balloons or if
UFOs,
they were UFOs. But the fact that Mars stationed direct on the degree of that original Neptune-Pluto conjunction from the 1890s is strange, especially when you look at the first week of August 1947. The Roswell crash also happened when Mars was in early Gemini.
Right.
And Uranus is going to be coming up to the degree of that Neptune-Pluto conjunction, and it seems like it might be. I mean, the implications of this are really strange, because it potentially speaks to the nature of what this is, at least from an astrological perspective. Because if it's related to this like Neptune-Pluto thing, then it explains some of the qualities of the whole phenomenon, the whole kind of UFO phenomenon, as something that seems kind of intangible, not really being able to be really grasped onto, something that seems to foster a lot of fraud and and nebulousness and mystery. It's, you know, part of our sort of cultural imagination. It's you know, woven into the fabric in some ways of like our pop culture. You know, with Neptune being potentially a sort of major signature for the UFO phenomenon, especially with its conjunction to Pluto, that's sort of like an empowerment of Neptune as the cultural imagination. And so it's interesting that there's so many like conspiracy theories surrounding it, and this whole, you know, mystery that seems to be the big Neptune component potentially of this phenomenon, and why it is the way it is, and why every photo of it looks like it's taken by a potato camera. You know, every video looks like it's taken with a potato. You know, so but it's weird because there does seem to be something kind of real. You know, there is something being tracked on radar. It has mass. It has, you know, it is a real phenomenon. We just can't quite, you know, grasp it unless, you know, as David Grush has claimed, we, you know, we have been able to kind of get a closer look at these things. And you know, there's so many different theories about what, you know, these things could be. Obviously there's the extraterrestrial hypothesis.
There's another theory that they're not extraterrestrial, but actually from beneath
From
the
the
Earth's crust, coming up
so
from volcanoes.
so crypto-terrestrial then.
Yeah,
The other theory would be interdimensional, where they
right.
are,
Yeah,
where they live here, but they're crossing over from like a higher plane or something, and just happen to be. The other option would be that they're us from the future,
right.
Which
It's Nick
kind
and
of
Patrick.
breaks my brain a little bit, because, you know, like, how will we be able, what happens to astrology, like, if something like time travel is real? Because if you were to go through a checklist of how would you know if time travelers have visited, you know, from the future, but what would it look like? And in some ways this phenomenon ticks off a few of those boxes, you know, because they seem to observe, but they don't seem to want to interact too much. They seem to keep their distance a little bit. And that might be the way you would behave if you were going back in time and wanting to observe, but maybe not wanting to disturb things too much. I don't know. It's impossible to say.
Yeah, I mean, you know, they could also be visitors from outer space who also just, you know, have their own. What was it in Star Trek? The rule that prevents you from interfering.
Oh, prime directive.
Prime directive. Thank you. Yeah,
right.
You know, something that could easily be in force there.
Right, or it could just be something, you know, completely different. I mean, it's impossible to say, but I think that you know, Dan Waits has provided, you know, the kind of workable sort of hypothesis of, at least of the astrological way of understanding
the astrological history of tracking this phenomenon.
It seems to be connected to like Neptune, Pluto, and degree of 8 degrees Gemini.
That's great work on Dan's part. He's really on fire these days.
Yeah. So I mean, I'm not, you know, I guess, you know, for myself, I
don't know that Carl Jung said anything about UFOs. Do tell us, Trabrex, if he ever did.
I think he did. Yeah.
Did he? I don't know.
I think he's talked about them as being kind of some sort of maybe like psychological manifestation of your mind or something like that. But I disagree.
Gee, what a startling thing for a psychologist to say.
They're real though. Like they really exist. They're real solid objects.
I mean, that's also kind of his view of, you know, astrology, and, you know,
I mean, unless you think we can just manifest things, you know, into reality, I think that you know, that, you know, because there's another theory that they're just the contemporary manifestation of something that's kind of always been with us in different eras. You know, it looked like pixies or gnomes or fairies, and now it looks more sort of technological. But that's kind of contradicted though by some of these older accounts of like I think like Alexander the Great's armies described seeing flying shields, which is a very interesting way, an appropriate way for describing you know, what
Yes.
we seem to have witnessed,
Yeah.
flying shields, flying saucers with discs,
Yeah.
same sort of idea. So I think whatever this is has been with us for a long time. And I think that, I more or less just come to accept, that this is a real phenomenon, regardless of what sort of the official line is. I know that these things exist. I don't tend to know what they are, but I think the sooner we kind of accept that we are not alone, probably on this planet, even uh, the less ontological shock we might have if anything else actually gets sort of officially disclosed about what we really know about these craft or their pilots, and what
Yeah.
their intentions are. And if they've been here as long as they have, then they seem to be somewhat peaceful, but we don't really know the full extent of what our connection to them is.
Yeah, I think what's his name, David, what's his name, who testified, said that people have actually died when it comes to contact with them.
Yeah, so
That the implication is that there's some kind of like agreement for now that we're going to try not to kill each other, but that deaths have happened.
right. Well, and it's also very interesting that there's actually been a lot of there's been some academic research being done on the prevalence of these sightings around nuclear facilities, that they seem to be drawn to radiation. There's even reports.
Well, yeah, why
From the
Roswell? Why Roswell in 1947? Like that alone is
right.
yeah.
There have also been reports of nuclear tests being disarmed in midair. There's this interview. I wish I had the names of these people so it didn't just sound like I'm riffing, but there was a man who was giving an interview about his time working for the military, taking video of nuclear tests, and he said while they were taking the test, this little craft comes in out of nowhere and it kind of shoots a beam at the rocket and disables it.
Awesome.
And I mean, yeah, they're anti-nuclear, or are they anti-us? I can't quite tell, but they don't seem to like nuclear weapons, and we have that in common.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
And the enemy of nuclear weapons is my friend. So there you go. Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. But I just, I don't have many answers. I'm not qualified to, obviously, I don't have any kind of inside information. But I guess for anyone watching this, wondering how we feel about this. I mean, we have witnessed, this kind of phenomenon, and I at least, I'm clearly convinced that this is a real phenomenon that people really experience, and should be studied. Should be disclosed. As much as reliable information is actually available, and notwithstanding potential distractions of hoaxes or frauds or that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Just looking at the
comments. The comments. Yeah.
Pretty out there. Yeah. This is probably the most out there we've been.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing about these live streams. We don't know where the conversation is going to go. We kept it. We interjected astrology here and there, but it wasn't a super astrological live stream. So I hope people don't feel cheated on the astrology. But yeah, we did get into even with UFOs, talking about Dan's observation of the Neptune-Pluto conjunction in the airships. But yeah, you saw one, I saw one. I also want to know what's going on here. I do approach everything though with heavy duty skepticism. Obviously, I'm as intrigued as anyone, and I would love to have answers. But
right. Yeah, I mean, I think, and
only let myself get so excited.
I mean, and I'm sure that most sightings probably have some kind of prosaic explanation, but I think some don't. And I think the thing that me and my brothers saw that day was, obviously not
what I saw could not be accounted for. What I saw could not be. I was willing to entertain anything. I thought, maybe they're having some big rock concert up there. You know, it's the summer, it's Saturday night. Maybe that's like a big stage they set up next to the cross. I don't know how they would do that, but
Yeah.
you know, I was willing to entertain anything. But no,
Yeah, it was a clear sky at the time, and this craft, like, it would like stop in dead air, like move and then stop and then go in a completely different direction. So it wasn't like a balloon being blown a lot, you know, it wasn't anything like that. It like, there was one point where it like disappeared very suddenly, and then it reappeared in a slightly different part of the sky. And when we saw that, we were just like, holy shit. Like, this is incredible. And then the fact that it came over us, that was pretty much the most mind-blowing things that has ever happened.
And I mean, we don't have the technology to
No.
like fake that with a
No.
projection. You know, like you can't use
No.
like a movie projector to like like this looked real.
No.
Yeah.
Well, and sometimes I've checked back in with my brothers about that, just saying, like, you know,
We all saw that, right? Yeah.
we had that happened, right? And like, yeah, like that really happened.
It's really fun because the night I saw mine, like I said, I had just said goodbye to my friend. And to this day, I even left him a voicemail. Like, he had gone off to the bar, and I'd left him a voicemail, like, John, come join me. There's something on top of the mountain. But he didn't see it till like the next
Oh
day.
God, I wish to
But
God I had a camera. I
had, this was 2011. This is before the iPhone. I had my little flip phone. I tried to take a picture, and you just saw like two lights. It was nothing. It was,
it just wasn't. Yeah, potato.
and it was nighttime. Yeah. It might as well have been a potato. Exactly.
Well, and I think that's really funny too, because people say, like, well, you know, why aren't there good photos of them? And it's like, well, these things are far away. You know, there's no zoom on a typical camera. You would need to be ready with like a telescopic zoom, you know, something to really get a good look at these things. And
it's a matter of time.
It's a matter of time. It's a matter of time. And I imagine, especially with the fact that we have satellites on the Earth at all times, it can zoom into something the size of a quarter from space. And we probably have like AI using machine learning to like identify unusual signatures. I'm sure we have more photos of these things than are being
sure.
But yeah. In any case,
yeah. Real Darko Arts asks, what was going on astrologically for you guys during your respective unusual sightings? I can say nothing that much for me. I mean, Jupiter had just gone into Taurus, which is my midheaven moon, and maybe you would use that, but it's not like, they're not startling transits. What about yourself? Yeah, August of 2010?
Yeah, August 1st, 2010 at right around sunset in Worcester, Massachusetts.
Okay.
And I believe there was a Saturn-Uranus opposition, with Uranus having recently entered my ninth, with Saturn in my third. I think there was a Mars-Saturn conjunction in my third.
It's Jupiter, Uranus in Aries, opposite Saturn, Venus, and Mars in Libra.
So that was happening across my ninth and third, which is interesting because I had this experience with my siblings.
I had 10th, not first. Sorry. Venus was still in Virgo, but it is Saturn, Mars opposite Jupiter, Uranus. Yeah, I remember this period well. Sorry?
Do you want to show the chart?
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Oh, no worries. Yeah, I've looked at it. I've looked at it. I'm not sure. I mean, it's obviously I remember it very clearly. It certainly. I don't know that it like was a. I don't know that it was a life-changing event as much as a. It was later because it was like right. Literally the sun was setting at the time that this happened, and it was like almost night by the time it was like basically nighttime once the sighting was over. It was like 15 minutes maybe that the whole thing lasted when it was like following us. So it would have been like right around later in the evening like that. But yeah, I'm a Leo rising, so the Jupiter Uranus conjunction would have been in my ninth. Mars Saturn conjunction was in my third, which is actually really interesting because the third is my Libra is my third house of siblings. And it was really interesting because, when me and my brother saw this, we rushed back home after, going to Burger King, and we, stayed out all night on the patio looking up in the sky to see if it would come back. And my older brother, who was not there for the sighting, he just mocked us the entire night. you know, he just, was ripping on us the whole time. We were out there, and he didn't believe a word, of what we were saying. And so it was kind of a funny like division, I guess, amongst the brothers that, there were the three of us who saw this thing. And
I mean, if
doubter,
you've never seen one that's a perfectly rational response,
yeah,
like
I mean,
you don't want people to be gullible and just believe in everything that comes along.
right.
Better the burden of proof be, enforced.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
And people should be skeptical. I remember seeing something and I thought it was something, and it was actually like a plastic bag in the wind.
Yeah, no, exactly.
I mean, it's a mirage, but that's what speaks to this kind of Neptunian nature of this phenomenon.
Yeah.
It's the dealing with like illusions and mirages, and the kind of non-rational things that can fill the void when you don't have enough information.
Yeah.
And what the mind kind of invents when there's not enough information. And I almost wonder if we're not even seeing what's actually there when we're looking at one of these things, that we're seeing some kind of holographic representation or something of what it might be. Like it just knowing that this has a sort of Neptunian signature potentially in astrological terms, I feel like that just really explains, that makes a lot of things click about this entire phenomenon. Why it's why it provides cinematic spectacle, why there's so many conspiracy theories surrounding it, why there's so much mystery surrounding it, why it's seemingly kind of a magnet for like just irrationality, but also genuine mystery. So it's just really endlessly kind of fascinating.
It is.
And hopefully we get more clarity, but it would be Neptune if we did.
Well, we do have Saturn Neptune conjunction coming up, so every now and then we get a peek behind the curtain, and that'll be the next one.
Well, I've been thinking about that.
Yeah, that's what I'm looking toward for a lot of these. Whatever's going to happen in 2025 with that and everything else going on, it's going to be a new world.
Right. I've been thinking about that because when conjunctions happen really close to the equinoctial or solstitial points, they often call those like world points, I think.
Yeah, world axis. Yeah,
world axis in mundane astrology, and I think that there is something to that. I'm reminded of how the moon was conjunct Jupiter and Uranus at 0 degrees of Libra at the moon landing. Which is a pretty, like, it wasn't any ordinary Jupiter-Uranus, event. It was one happening kind of on that world axis.
That's one of the first times that you have people all over the planet watching the same thing happen on TV.
Yeah. And it's this great step, one leap forward.
People just can't believe it. Yeah,
right. And so the fact that Saturn Neptune is going to be happening at 0 Aries makes me wonder what the kind of global significance of this is, more so than just even one place. It's like the whole thing is kind of, and since Saturn's like the big reality check or bringing clarity to like Saturn's the one planet that can bring clarity, to Neptune.
Space Force. Don't get me started.
Although I sometimes wonder,
we managed to get through most of this episode without talking about the orange dude.
One thing I do think is sort of interesting, though, about Space Force is that the day it officially started, I believe, was at a Sun-Mars conjunction in Virgo.
Okay.
It was like September 2019. Okay. And I believe this is close to where Mars was for the founding of, the Declaration of Independence Mars, which I believe is also in Virgo. I think it had some connection to the U.S. Army chart too, like the founding chart for the U.S. Army. So I thought it was interesting that we had like a new branch of the military being added at a Sun-Mars conjunction when there was some of these sort of previous Mars in Virgo placements in these foundational charts. So that was one thing that sort of interested me.
The Declaration of Independence had Mars in Gemini.
Oh. Wait, what was I talking about then? Let's see. Let's search my tweets. I think I tweeted about it. Space Force. What was it actually? Okay, so near to a Pluto return of the U.S. Army. Interesting inversion between Mars Neptune. For what it's worth, Mars conjunct Neptune and Virgo at the establishment of the Army. Mars in Virgo opposite Neptune and Pisces at the launch of the Space Force. U.S. military itself was established when Mars was in Virgo, but it was a couple of months after a gestation direct, so it was in a fairly optimal phase, whereas this Space Force will have Mars combust the Sun. Okay. So it was the U.S. Army's establishment on June 1775. Bless you.
Excuse me.
Yeah, so there was that's it. So the U.S. Army was established on June 14th, 1775, when Mars was at 15
Right.
Virgo, conjunct Neptune at 19 Virgo, and then Space Command was launched August 29th, 2019, when the Sun was conjunct Virgo at 6 to 7 degrees of Virgo, and that was also kind of a Neptune sort of opposition. So this seems to be kind of a Mars-Neptune thing.
Yeah.
On there.
Mars had gone retrograde at the beginning of 1775. So by the time the military was starting in June of 1775 with Mars and Virgo, it was after the retrograde. So it's
there you go again.
Another one of these instances. Yeah.
Of the bow being the arrow being stretched back.
Yeah, the arrow launching after the direct station. So yeah, there's that as well. I'd love to keep going. This is a good place, but I've got a client. I've got to think about lunch, so I don't.
All right.
I don't have my client on an empty stomach, and I've got to wrap it up.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I blew my nose into the microphone just now.
Yeah, no worries.
I'm getting the allergies again.
Oh no.
All right. Fantastic, Patrick. Thank you. Who are you, Patrick?
I'm Patrick Watson. I'm an astrologer. You can see my work and my services and products at my website, patrickwatsonAstrology.com, and I'm on most social media websites at pwatsonastro.
Fantastic. And I am Nick Dagan Best. You can find me at nickdaganbestastrologer.com, and I'm available for a variety of astrological services. And stay tuned. I'm making videos. I'm hoping to start putting them out soon on the TikTok, on the Talk Tick. And so all you kids will think like I'm a hep cat, you know. So stay tuned, and we'll be back next week. Tomorrow I'll be doing my solo stream. I'm not sure if I'm going to have Sam on tomorrow or not. I haven't covered that with him, but I haven't done a solo live stream in over a month, so maybe I'll just do that one myself. In any case, stay tuned. Patrick, thank you again. We'll see you next week, and we'll be back, and bye, everyone.
See ya.